Have you ever walked through a city at night, streets silent, windows dark, and felt that strange sense of being watched, even though no one was there? Jung would say the psyche builds similar landscapes inside us, cities without maps, constructed from memory, pain, and shadows we've never faced. Men live in these invisible cities without realizing it. They build houses out of their father's voice. They drink from fountains poisoned by comparison. They pray in temples devoted to control. And they mistake these places for who they are. These are not cities on a map. They are inner geographies, formed by trauma, projection, and the unexamined shadow. Jung warned that when we don't face these unconscious structures, we become trapped within them, wandering through ghost towns built by wounds that are not entirely ours, like Dante describing circles of hell or Borges drawing a labyrinth that has no exit. These inner places feel eternal, but they are not eternal. They are prisons only if we choose to keep living there. If you have ever found yourself repeating the same relationship pattern, chasing the same destructive pleasure, or comparing yourself endlessly to other men, then you've walked these streets. If you've ever heard an inner voice that isn't your own but still dictates your choices, then you've slept under the roofs of these psychological cities. Everyone has. That is not a mark of failure, but of being human. And this is where Jung's warning takes on weight. These aren't theories meant for shelves in a university library. They are survival maps. They tell us what happens when we give our sovereignty away to inherited voices, compulsions, and projections. They show us why peace feels so foreign, and why chaos often feels like home. Across this journey, we'll explore 7 of these cities men unconsciously inhabit. Each one has its own architecture, some built from criticism, some from desire, some from silence. Each one is seductive in its own way, and each one carries a cost. But this isn't a story of despair. Every city that traps us also offers a clue about how to leave. That's the paradox. The shadow is not evil, it is simply life unlived, waiting to be integrated. The prison walls can become the very bricks with which we build a path forward. So, as you listen, I invite you to notice, which of these places feels familiar? Which one feels uncomfortably close? And which one you've tried to leave behind but keep returning to? Because recognition is already the beginning of sovereignty. Let's begin with the first city, the one most men inherit before they even know they are walking its streets, the city of eternal father's shadow. There is a voice most men carry with them long after childhood ends. Sometimes it is loud and cruel, sometimes it is soft but piercing, like a whisper that slips into every decision. It is the father's voice, not the real father standing in the kitchen or mowing the lawn, but the internalized father who sets up camp in the psyche. Jung called these structures complexes, autonomous pockets of emotion and memory that live inside us as if they had a mind of their own. Freud would have called it the superego, the critic that watches and judges. When a boy grows up under criticism, absence, or domination, the father does not disappear when he leaves home. He remains as a shadow that overlays every choice. Some men hear this voice when they try to rest. You're lazy. Others hear it when they succeed. Not enough. Still others rebel, building a life in opposition to him, only to discover that rebellion is just another form of obedience, his shadow still deciding the terms of the game. This is why so many men feel both driven and hollow. They are propelled forward by a ghost. They measure their worth by a standard they did not create. They run marathons trying to outrun a man who is no longer present, or perhaps was never truly present at all, and the weight of that invisible presence is exhausting. Jung's insight was clear. A complex is not just memory. It is a living thing in the psyche. It has energy. It has tone. It has a story. When the father's complex dominates, it fuses with identity. The man no longer knows where his own voice ends and where the father's begins. That is why shame feels so personal. It is not just guilt for something done. It is the sense of being fundamentally wrong in the eyes of an authority that has taken up residence inside. Think of the film Whiplash. The tyrant mentor breaks the student down, demanding impossible perfection. The young man believes he is striving for greatness, but he is actually circling the father's shadow, trapped between craving approval and proving defiance. The mentor becomes both God and prison. The shadow both wounds and drives him. Now pause for a moment. Notice how this lands in your own body. When you hear the word father, what stirs? Tightness in the chest, heat in the stomach, a flicker of defensiveness. That sensation itself is the doorway. It tells you the shadow is near. And here lies the paradox. The father's shadow is not simply an enemy. It can become a catalyst, but only if we learn to separate our essence from his voice. That separation is not abandonment of lineage. It is individuation. It is the difference between repeating a script and authoring your own. One way to begin this is deceptively simple. First, notice the voice when it appears. Catch its texture, its tone. Second, name it for what it is. An archetype, a complex, not the truth of your soul. Third, respond with your chosen values. Instead of "you're weak," you might answer inwardly, "I choose presence over performance." Instead of "not enough," you might reply, "I choose integrity over comparison." Over time, this practice rewires the nervous system. The critic may still whisper, but it loses its authority. The man begins to hear himself more clearly, and that clarity is sovereignty, the capacity to live by an inner compass rather than a borrowed voice. This is the first city Jung warned about, and many men spend a lifetime within its walls. But there are other cities, equally seductive and equally binding. If the father's shadow builds a prison of judgment, the next one builds a palace of mirrors. And in that palace, what we fall in love with is not the other person, but the disowned fragments of ourselves. Let us enter the second city, the mirror palace of projection, loving what you deny in yourself. There is a peculiar blindness in love. A man meets someone and feels as if lightning has struck. The attraction is magnetic, irrational, almost unbearable in its pull. He calls it chemistry, destiny, even soulmate connection. And yet, again and again, the relationship collapses into the same familiar pattern: distance, frustration, heartbreak. The story looks new, but the ending is already written. Jung described this as projection. What we cannot see in ourselves, we project onto others. The psyche builds a palace of mirrors, and in that palace we fall in love not with the other person, but with our own disowned qualities reflected back at us. The beloved becomes a screen on which we cast the shadow, both the golden traits we have disowned and the darker impulses we fear to acknowledge. Think of the man who is drawn again and again to unavailable partners. He believes he is chasing love, but he is actually chasing a mirror of his own avoidance. A confession on an online forum once captured this perfectly. A man admitted that he kept falling for women who could not commit. Only after years of pain did he realize he was equally unavailable. His attraction was his own shadow calling out through another body. Modern neuroscience offers a parallel explanation. Attraction is not simply choice. It is also a loop of dopamine and oxytocin forged by old wounds. Trauma bonds mimic love. The nervous system recognizes the familiar, even when it is destructive, and rewards it with chemical intensity. The very thrill of the spark can be evidence that the shadow is at work. This is why what feels like meant to be often ends in repetition. The unfinished wound seeks resolution, but it seeks it by reenactment. The psyche tries to heal by recreating the scene, hoping for a different outcome. But without awareness, the outcome remains the same. How does one begin to see through the palace of mirrors? A simple doorway is reflection itself. When attraction or resentment feels intense, take note of 3 qualities in the partner, qualities that spark both admiration and irritation. Then ask, could these be fragments of myself I have not claimed? The answer is rarely comfortable. To admit that the tenderness I crave in her is tenderness I have buried in myself, or that the avoidance I resent in her is avoidance I practice in secret, is to break the mirror and see my own face. This is the gift hidden in projection. It is not merely a trap, it is also a teacher. To see what I have cast out is to regain a piece of my wholeness. The palace of mirrors can become a school if I dare to look at the reflection not as fate, but as feedback. Men who recognize this often describe a strange relief. The endless cycle of, "Why do I always choose her?" softens into a different question. What part of me am I meeting through her? And that shift is sovereignty. It turns obsession into opportunity. It transforms longing into integration. But projection is only one form of psychic architecture. If the mirror palace seduces us with the face of love, the next city seduces us with safety. It offers protection, order, and certainty. And yet, its walls are built not of freedom, but of fear. Let us step now into the third city, the fortress of control, A safe prison built from fear of chaos control feels like safety. For many men, it becomes the unspoken religion of daily life. Control over work schedules, control over appearances, control over emotions that must not spill into the open. Beneath this obsession with order lies a quieter fear, the fear of chaos, abandonment, and being exposed as vulnerable. The fortress promises protection, but what it delivers is confinement. Psychologists call this the illusion of control. Ellen Langer's research showed that human beings often overestimate how much they can influence outcomes. The nervous system clings to routines and micro-decisions, not because they guarantee safety, but because they create the feeling of safety. Jung saw a similar dynamic in the archetype of the Senex, the old man who values discipline, structure, and tradition. The Senex has wisdom, but when he rules without balance, he becomes rigid, turning life into stone. A man living inside this fortress might appear successful. His house is orderly, his career stable, his body trained into discipline. Yet inside, there is restlessness. Any surprise, any loss of control, a delay, a partner's unpredictability, a sudden illness, threatens to crack the walls. What looks like strength is often exhaustion. The fortress must be maintained day and night because underneath its walls lies the terror of collapse. History gives us a more nuanced image of this. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, wrote in his private journals not only about duty and reason, but also about surrender. He admitted again and again that fate would not bend to his will. His strength was not in controlling everything, but in accepting what could not be controlled. The paradox is clear. Discipline without surrender breeds rigidity. Discipline with surrender creates mastery. For a man caught in control, even small experiments with uncertainty can be radical. Imagine one intentional act each day where the outcome cannot be controlled. Taking a new route home without checking the map. Sitting in silence with a partner without planning the conversation. Allowing space for error. These gestures may seem trivial, but they remind the nervous system that chaos is not always catastrophe. They loosen the grip of the fortress brick by brick. In the body, this loosening can feel like both relief and fear. Muscles relax, but the mind resists. What if something goes wrong? That tension is part of the practice. It is not a sign of failure, but of the nervous system learning to expand its capacity for uncertainty. The fortress of control is seductive because it works, for a while. It keeps danger at bay. It keeps emotions contained. It keeps the man moving forward. But in time, the walls turn into bars. What was built for safety becomes a prison. And when safety becomes suffocation, many men turn in the opposite direction. If control numbs the spirit with rigidity, the next city numbs it with excess. It offers not order but indulgence, not restraint but abandon. And yet it too is a trap, dressed in the promise of freedom. We now enter the fourth city, the swamp of compulsive pleasure, where dopamine becomes your god. If the fortress of control imprisons through rigidity, the swamp of compulsive pleasure lures men with sweetness. It begins innocently. One more video, one more drink, one more scroll before bed. Yet slowly, what once felt like choice becomes compulsion. Desire turns into worship, and the god enthroned is dopamine. Neuroscience has shown how easily the brain's reward circuits are hijacked. Rutgers University studies on pornography revealed that repeated stimulation reshapes neural pathways, dulling natural pleasure and demanding stronger doses to feel the same spark. Social media algorithms exploit the same loop, drip-feeding novelty and triggering dopamine bursts with every swipe. The body becomes restless in stillness, starved when there is nothing new to consume. Jung might describe this swamp as a shadow of Eros, the life force of connection and creativity. When Eros is denied its deeper expression, it collapses into addiction. Pleasure becomes the substitute for intimacy, and stimulation becomes the mask for emptiness. Men caught here often describe a strange paradox. The more they chase pleasure, the less they feel it. The swamp feeds hunger while draining nourishment. Ancient myth already warned us of this pattern. Odysseus, tied to the mast of his ship, resisted the sirens whose song promised ecstasy, but led only to death. His struggle is timeless. Desire is not evil, it is sacred fuel. But when untethered from meaning, it becomes a trap. The sirens of our age are not mythical women on rocks. They are screens, substances, and endless novelty whispering promises of satisfaction. What does it feel like in the body to be caught in this swamp? There is a jittery restlessness, a craving that refuses silence. There is shame after indulgence, followed by the quick return to the same cycle. Gabor Mate would call this not a disease, but an attempt at relief, a way of anesthetizing unspoken pain. The man is not weak, he is dysregulated. His nervous system is searching for regulation in the wrong places. To begin disentangling from the swamp, one can practice awareness without condemnation. A simple dopamine audit can shift perception. For 3 days, note what triggers the urge, delay gratification for a brief moment, and replace at least one cycle with an embodied act, stretching, walking, even drinking water slowly. The point is not abstinence through sheer willpower, but remembrance that the body can be soothed without the swamp. Men who attempt this often report something surprising. It is not deprivation that feels hardest, but the sudden return of silence. Without stimulation, old emotions rise, the loneliness, the boredom, the ache that the swamp was covering. And here lies the deeper invitation, to face the silence without fleeing. The swamp loses power when the man learns that presence itself is survivable. Compulsive pleasure promises liberation, but delivers numbness. It is not freedom to feel everything. It is the cage that prevents feeling at all. And when the swamp dries up, what remains is not satisfaction, but wasteland. A barren terrain where men measure themselves endlessly against others, haunted by the gaze of imaginary rivals. This brings us to the 5th city, the wasteland of endless comparison, living under the gaze of imaginary men. Few prisons are as invisible as comparison. A man scrolls through his phone late at night, sees the physiques, the bank accounts, the lifestyles of others, and feels the silent verdict: not enough. He enters a room and imagines that every man there is taller, stronger, more confident. This is the wasteland, not because the world is barren, but because his own worth is measured under the gaze of imaginary men. Leon Festinger's social comparison theory explained that human beings evaluate themselves not in isolation, but against others. This was once adaptive. It guided our place within the tribe. But in the modern world, where comparison is infinite and curated, the psyche is flooded. Every rival becomes a projection screen, every stranger a mirror for inadequacy. Jung added a deeper dimension. Often the man we envy is not truly another, but a projection of our unlived potential. We do not simply compare. We mourn the versions of ourselves we have not allowed to live. This is why comparison burns. It is not just jealousy of another's strength. It is grief for our own suppressed strength. Not just envy of another's success, but sorrow for our own abandoned purpose. The wasteland is haunted not by real men, but by the ghosts of what we could have been. Nietzsche spoke of the Übermensch, the one who rises beyond imitation into self-overcoming. His point was not arrogance, but authenticity. To transcend comparison is not to win against others, but to wrestle against one's own shadows. It is the difference between asking, "How do I measure up to him?" and asking, "How do I measure up to what is possible in me?" In the body, comparison often shows itself as tension in the chest, shallow breath, and the restless scanning of the environment. The nervous system feels exposed, as if on trial. The mind loops through silent rankings: better than, worse than, behind, ahead. This cycle drains energy that could be spent in presence. One way to soften this grip is through reversal. Instead of asking only what others have that you lack, ask what others might see in you that they desire. Perhaps it is resilience, humor, or the simple courage to survive hardship. Even the smallest recognition shifts the inner posture from scarcity to presence. The wasteland begins to sprout with signs of life, yet the temptation to compare is ancient, and its grip is stubborn. To dismantle it fully requires not only reframing, but also a return to sovereignty, deciding whose gaze truly matters. Comparison collapses when a man roots his identity not in borrowed eyes, but in his own alignment. This is individuation, not superiority over others, but wholeness within oneself. But even when a man escapes comparison, another trap awaits, one that looks like kindness, but slowly drains his life. If the wasteland chains him through rivalry, the next city chains him through endless agreement. We now arrive at the 6th city, the echo chamber of pleasing, dying from 1,000 yeses. At first, the echo chamber feels warm. A man learns early that if he agrees, if he bends, if he anticipates the needs of others, he will be loved, or at least he will avoid rejection. He becomes the dependable one, the generous one, the one who never makes waves. But slowly, every yes chips away at his own center until he no longer remembers what he truly wants. The kindness he built as a survival strategy becomes the echo chamber of his own disappearance. From a psychological view, people-pleasing is not simply generosity. It is often rooted in fear, fear of abandonment, fear of conflict, fear of being unworthy unless useful. Neuroscience shows how this pattern taxes the body. Chronic people-pleasing keeps cortisol levels elevated, leading to exhaustion and burnout. The nervous system remains on alert, scanning others for cues, adjusting behavior to maintain harmony. On the surface, he looks calm, but inside he is stretched thin, fraying quietly at the edges. Jung would see this as another shadow dynamic. The shadow here is not anger or aggression, but the unlived capacity to say no. By denying his own boundaries, the man unconsciously seeks control, not overt dominance, but covert influence. If he is endlessly agreeable, then perhaps he can avoid rejection. But what looks like selflessness often conceals fear. Consider the testimony of a man who, in therapy, realized that his so-called niceness was a strategy to manage others. He wasn't serving them. He was trying to keep them close, to protect himself from loneliness. When he finally spoke his truth, when he risked saying no, he discovered that relationships became fewer but more authentic. The 1,000 small betrayals of himself gave way to the honesty of being seen as he was. In the body, the echo chamber often feels like tightness in the throat, a shallow voice, or a nervous smile that arrives before true agreement is felt. It is a somatic habit of consent. To break it is to reclaim one's voice, not by shouting, but by speaking plainly. Boundaries are not aggression. They are love with a spine. A useful beginning is to carry simple language for refusal. Sentences like, "I'm not available for that right now," or "I want to, but it would cost me too much," allow a man to hold his ground without shame. At first, these phrases feel heavy on the tongue. The nervous system trembles, as if survival itself were at stake. But with repetition, the tremble becomes steadiness. The echo chamber begins to collapse. And here is the paradox. Saying no is often the deepest act of love. For when a man refuses from integrity, he gives others the gift of meeting his true self rather than his performance. He honors both his limits and theirs. Relationships may shrink, but they also deepen. Still, one chamber echoes louder than all the rest, the silence of the life not lived. If pleasing others erases the present self, the final city erases the future self. It is the mausoleum where possibility is buried before it can breathe. Let us enter the 7th city, the mausoleum of unlived life, the ghost of what you could have been. There is a silence heavier than failure. It is the silence of things never attempted, words never spoken, paths never walked. A man may survive decades in this silence, outwardly steady, inwardly haunted. This is the mausoleum of unlived life, where possibilities are entombed while he is still breathing. Jung wrote of the unlived life as a central danger of ignoring individuation. When the shadow remains unexamined, when fear and comfort dictate choices, entire parts of the self are exiled. Over time, the psyche begins to ache not from what was lost, but from what was never born. Kahneman's research on loss aversion adds another layer. Human beings fear loss more than they desire gain. Yet in avoiding failure, they accept something worse, the corrosion of unused potential. Procrastination, rationalization, endless postponement, all are whispers of this mausoleum. The man tells himself he will write the book when he has more time, pursue love when he feels more confident, change careers when the perfect opportunity arrives. Years pass. The tomb fills with ghosts, each one a fragment of the life he could have lived. Art and story have long mirrored this pain. In The Last Samurai, the warrior grapples with the shame of wasted years, realizing too late that he had betrayed himself by clinging to half measures. The tragedy is not in failing. It is in never stepping fully onto the path. To die having attempted is bearable. To die without having tried is torment. How does this city feel in the body? Heavy shoulders, a dull ache in the chest, the fatigue of carrying a weight that has no name. Regret is not always sharp. Often it is slow erosion, the daily sense that something essential is missing. Many men describe it as emptiness even in the midst of success, a hollow echo behind the applause. Yet even here, there is a doorway. To confront the mausoleum is to imagine oneself at the end of life, looking back. From that vantage point, what regrets would speak the loudest? Not the mistakes, but the silences, the love never confessed, the purpose never pursued, the values never lived. Writing this down, even in a single sentence, brings the ghost into view. And once seen, the ghost can no longer rule invisibly. Men often fear this exercise, believing it will drown them in shame. But many discover the opposite. When the ghost is faced, energy returns. A single action, however small, breaks the spell. The mausoleum cracks, light enters, and life stirs where there was only stone. This is Jung's deeper warning. The unlived life is more dangerous than failure. For failure contains movement, but the unlived contains paralysis. To remain in this city is to haunt one's own existence, to live as a caretaker of tombs. And so we arrive at the threshold of choice. Having walked through these 7 cities, the Father's shadow, the mirror palace, the fortress, the swamp, the wasteland, the echo chamber, and the mausoleum, the question now is not only where you have lived, but where you will choose to live from here. We close with the final chapter, leaving the prison, choosing to build instead of haunting. We have walked through 7 cities of the psyche, each one built not of stone or steel, but of memory, wound, and shadow. The Father's shadow, projection, control, pleasure, comparison, pleasing, and the unlived life. They may look different on the surface, but they all share a single truth. They are prisons without visible bars. Jung's warning was never moralistic. He was not telling men to be better in some abstract way. His warning was existential. To remain in these cities is to hand over sovereignty to borrowed voices, compulsions, and illusions. To step beyond them is not perfection. It is individuation, the slow work of becoming whole. Imagine Odysseus after the burning of Troy. He could have wandered the ruins forever, circling loss, replaying grief. Instead, he set sail for Ithaca, uncertain, delayed, but moving toward home. That is the choice before every man, to haunt the ruins of inner prisons, or to voyage toward the home of the self. The path forward is not grandiose. It begins with recognition, to notice the Father's voice and name it, to see the projection in attraction and claim the shadow as one's own, to let go of control in one small act of surrender, to step out of the swamp by delaying one urge, to reverse comparison with a glance at one's own gifts, to risk saying no when the throat tightens, to face the ghost of the unlived and act, even in one line, one gesture. These are not quick fixes, they are seeds, and like seeds, they grow in silence, in persistence, in seasons both harsh and kind. The work is less about escape and more about transformation, turning the very materials of the prison into bricks for a new foundation. So the final question lingers. Which city felt most familiar to you? Which one have you visited more often than you wished? And which one are you ready to leave behind, not with shame, but with awareness as your passport? The choice is yours, to stay in one of these ghostly cities, or to begin building a home that is truly your own. Individuation is not about becoming someone else. It is about coming home to yourself, and that is the task of a lifetime.